to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. President Trump has been waging an assault on transgender people. Since taking office, he's signed a series of executive orders to dismantle their rights. These moves aren't surprising. Trump used ugly rhetoric on the campaign trail to target this small minority of people, and it's really small. Transgender young people and adults account for less than 2% of the U.S. population. But advocates warn that attacking trans rights opens the door to rolling back other people's rights. Before we look at the Trump administration's attack on human rights and the bigger implications, we want to know what it means to be transgender.
Yeah, Tia, the Human Rights Campaign explains that a transgender person is someone whose sex assigned at birth is different from who they know they are on the inside. So that could include someone who's medically transitioned, so their physical appearance aligns with their understanding of their gender. It also includes people who don't solely identify as male or female. To discuss why Trump is targeting this small minority of Americans and why attacks on transgender rights are relevant to everyone, Jay Kaplan joins us now. He's a staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan, where he leads the LGBTQ project. Jay, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll look at the landscape for LGBTQ rights in Michigan in a moment. But first, could you discuss the federal policy changes enacted by the Trump administration that are targeting the rights of transgender people?
Well, I would characterize it as an all-out assault on members of the transgender community, from efforts to deny people life-saving, medical necessary health care, access to accurate federal identity documents, the ability to attend school in a safe and supportive learning environment, the ability to be able to serve in the military, and the ability to participate in school activities like sports in accordance with your gender identity. The purpose of these executive orders are basically to erase existence of transgender people and to no longer acknowledge who they are and what their authentic identity is, and to deny them basic and essential rights that are accorded to all other people. And it's very distressing seeing this, and it's really based on a most cynical political calculation that by attacking a very small minority, as you mentioned, that many in this country might not feel that they don't know somebody who is transgender, or they may not understand what it means to be transgender. They can use this to their political gain, and it's lacking a sense of moral compass and decency about how we as a country treat individuals. And I think it certainly raises a number of constitutional issues, and that's why we're seeing many legal challenges to these executive orders in the federal courts.
Jay, human rights advocates say taking away the rights of one group of people portends the same for other groups of people. And I realize this is something you're focused on. Can you talk about that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. If we allow one group, that marginalized group, to have their rights being taken away from them, and we're silent and we don't say anything, it just presents, more opportunities for some of, for this administration and other people who would like to see other people denied rights, other marginalized groups to be denied rights. And just as an example, by taking away transgender rights, this also sets the stage to take away rights of people who identify as being lesbian or gay, because the same motivating factor of discrimination against the LGBTQ community as a whole is the issue of sex, people not conforming to society's notions or stereotypes about how somebody is supposed to look, how they're supposed to act, who they're supposed to love based on the gender that was assigned to them at birth. And so if we allow transgender people to have their rights be taken away from them or to be denied access to rights accorded to other people, it's only natural that we'll see that same trajectory with the lesbian and gay population and other marginalized populations. There's there's a saying that says that people will vote against their own interests if a politician or elected official can make them feel superior to some other group. Even if it harms them themselves, they will go ahead and do this. And I think that's part of the strategy, the political motivation behind some of the things we're seeing, not only with the trans community, but also, in terms of demonizing immigrants and, having policies that call for the mass deportation of people, even if they might be here illegally, or they haven't committed any crimes. So I think it all runs in that same trajectory.
You mentioned, this is part of President Trump's strategy to sow confusion about what transgender people even are. And I wonder, for you as an advocate, how long you've been working to just try and cut through that confusion and be the antidote and humanize transgender people. I mean, it's one reason why we feel it's important on the Metro just to remind folks what it even means to be transgender.
Oh, absolutely. I think for too long, the opposition has controlled the narrative. And I think part of that is because there's so many different mechanisms that people get their information, including false disinformation. There was a study showing that Fox News, I think it was in 2023, they presented more than 400 negative stories about transgender people. So many people who might be watching that network who might not have known or think they didn't know somebody who identified as transgender, they come away with a certain perception. So it is our responsibility to take control of that narrative and to make sure that we have members of the transgender community who are visible, who can refute many of the lies and disinformation that have gone on. And just as an example, President Trump during his campaign talked about trans kids going to school and getting surgery without telling their parents. Totally false information. Trans youth are not eligible to receive gender-confirming surgeries. And yet that particular lie was able to take hold on particular media mechanisms that people got that information. So it's a challenge, but we have to do it. And we also have to remind people that often this is a distraction. It's a distraction from issues that voters have said, what is primary importance to them. And I think it's a reflection on some of these elected officials and politicians' inability to come up with real solutions to real problems that impact people through these distractions.
You're listening to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're talking about the Trump administration's attack on transgender rights and the broader implications. Our guest is Jay Kaplan. He's a staff attorney with the ACLU of Michigan, specializing in LGBTQ rights. Now, there are a lot of people who are afraid of trans people. How do you approach conversations with those who fear the change in social norms that we're seeing right now? How do you combat those lies and misinformation you're talking about?
I think the first thing I would say is that transgender people have been around for centuries and they've lived their lives and they live their authentic lives. And most likely, some of these people who express fears about being around transgender people have probably been around transgender people and have shared spaces with transgender people. They just might not have known it. And I would also encourage conversations. If you don't know something about what it means to be transgender, what gender identity means, how does one live with the diagnosis of what's called gender dysphoria when your gender identity doesn't match the gender assigned at birth, to ask questions and to have those conversations. I always encourage those conversations. No question is an ignorant question or a wrong question. It's important that we get facts and that we get the information we need in order to make intelligent and humane choices about what kind of policy we want to see from our government.
And Jay, just thinking about the state of Michigan as a whole and what we're seeing happen in the state of Michigan, when you rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how friendly do you believe the state of Michigan is right now for the LGBTQ plus community?
We've made a lot of progress in the last, I would say, half a decade in terms of we now have comprehensive civil rights protections for LGBTQ people. We have some very good identity document policies for transgender people. We have a very good Medicaid policy with regards to accessing gender-affirming health care. So those are all very, very positive things. And yet we are also seeing efforts. We've just since January, the majority party in the Michigan House has introduced, I believe it's now up to 5 anti-trans pieces of legislation. And the other thing I think is very important given the progress that we've made, it's also very important for our leaders who have been allies to the LGBTQ community, particularly with the transgender community. They need to speak up. They need to speak out. There's been a certain timidity from some of our elected officials with regards to these executive orders and even regards to legislation that has been introduced in Michigan. It's important more than ever for our allies and our friends to speak up and speak out against these things.
And Jay, we were, referring to the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, which, was extended to protect LGBTQ plus folks. So when we talk a little bit about that expansion, if you could expand on the significance on it and as well the significance of seeing those bills pop up in the Michigan State House.
It's incredibly significant because right now there's only 23 states that have civil rights laws that explicitly cover sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression. It only took Michigan 46 years to finally pass the legislation, but it's important that we have that because we can use our state civil rights laws to challenge some of these discriminatory executive orders. An executive order is not a law. A president is not a king, and he can't just decide, I don't like, states having civil rights laws that protect certain people against discrimination. I want them to be discriminated against. It doesn't work that way. And executive orders are subject to legal challenges. So what's so helpful in Michigan, unlike, the other 27 states that don't have these protections, we can say to different entities, you still have an obligation to comply with our state civil rights laws. These executive orders have not given you a license to openly discriminate against transgender people.
And Jay, before we get down to the end of the conversation here, I hear you talking about the lawmakers who need to stand up and speak out a little bit more in support of the LGBTQ plus community, but especially trans folks here in our state. But, oftentimes we hear folks who are just afraid to speak out because of their own repercussions that they'll face or, what they may endure. Can you talk about how folks can I guess, stand up without that fear of losing friends or family or whatever it may be? But can you talk about going and fighting through that fear?
Sure. And I think there's some political fear after the 2024 election. There were certain pundits that said, if the Democrats weren't supportive of transgender people, they might have won more elections. That's not reflective in actual polling that was done and surveys that were done. But I would say that, you have to look at what your values are. And if you believe in treating people fairly and with dignity and that if you think it's cruel to take away health care from people, life-saving health care, to deny people the ability to be able to go to school and to be safe at school and to be regarded who they are, maybe you need to question, if those things are okay with you. But if you feel strongly that that's wrong, you need to stand up for that. Because otherwise, why are you in public office? What is your purpose in being there? It shouldn't just be to be reelected year after year after year. It's to actually do good for the public good. And I would say for people who are outside of the political spectrum, it's about what are your morals? What are your ethics that you believe in? And if you believe that something is wrong, then you need to have that conversation. We don't have to always call out people. We can try to call them in and try to get an understanding. Why do they feel that way? Where are they getting that information? And hopefully we can provide them with some actual factual information so they hopefully will question some of their perceptions about this community. Transgender people, like everybody else, want to be able to live their lives. They want to live their lives They want to have a good paying job. They want to be able to afford their bills. They want to have friends. They want to have families. They have the same goals and aspirations as everybody else. They're not different the way that certain politicians are trying to make them out to be, and they're not trying to threaten anybody else's existence. You can hold on to whatever your gender identity is or what your sexual orientation is. They just want to exist as their authentic selves.
Jay Kaplan is a staff attorney at ACLU of Michigan, where he leads the LGBTQ project. Jay, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much.
From the WDET newsroom, Detroit is expanding its private sewer repair program to 75 more neighborhoods. The city got $85 million from the federal government to help people whose homes were damaged when heavy rain caused flooding in 2021. The repair efforts started last year in the 22 hardest hit neighborhoods. Mayor Mike Duggan says city workers have helped more than 400 families so far. The expansion will help them reach another 1,000 homes. The Water and Sewerage Department will clean and inspect lateral service lines and repair or replace them as needed.
Coming up at 11, Detroit is known for its cars and its music. But what about its style? What about the mink fur coats, the gator shoes, and streetwear that people like to show off here? We'll be discussing Detroit fashion, and we want to hear from you. What is Detroit's style? What kind of shoes and shirts and coats remind you of the city? The number is 313-577-1019.
Up next, what does hip-hop, design, and architecture all have in common? The women who use all three to create unique community spaces in Detroit. We'll learn more about a panel discussion celebrating women leading the way. We'll be right back here on the Metro. Stay with us.